Michael groaned as the torturous screech of his ruthless alarm clock bombarded his tormented ears. He writhed in his bed, then smacked the alarm clock several times before it finally silenced its relentless cry. He rolled out of bed, teetering as if he had forgotten how to stand. His eyes burned, eyelids heavy, body shivering. He turned his eyes to his soft blue bed, wanting to lay back down, wrap himself in his warm blankets, and close his eyes for just a few more minutes. But he knew that if he did, then he wouldn't get back up. He would miss school. But was missing school really that bad? He could just miss one day, and then make up for the work later. Michael. Michael's eyes shot open as someone nudged his shoulder. He couldn't remember when he had fallen back asleep, or if he had ever even been awake at all. He sat up in his bed to see Thomas, who had recently gotten out of bed, judging by his frizzy brown hair. He patted Michael's shoulder again. It's time to get up, Michael. Michael slid off the bed, the blue carpet freezing to his bare feet. Yeah, thanks, He paused, closing his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened them again. I just didn't get much sleep last night. Thomas looked puzzled. You look like you haven't slept all night. Michael shrugged with a small, forced grin. Yeah, that's pretty much how it was. Thomas shook his head. I'm sorry. Michael shrugged again. It's okay. Thomas tilted his head. Dad left before I was up. I don't know why. But he didn't make us anything before he left. He nodded toward the door. But I made you breakfast, though. Come on. Michael's body screamed in extreme desperation for sleep, not for food, but he nodded. Thanks. The school was packed with teachers and students, each in their own unique neon fashions. Michael struggled to keep his eyes open, mostly seeing nothing but splashes of color moving across his vision. He parked his bike next to Jenna's at the Holder, and they began walking, side by side, toward the school. Michael asked, How'd you sleep? Jenna looked at Michael with the same dreary expression he imagined on his own face, her voice gravelly as if she had gargled iron nails. Terrible. Michael shrugged. Yeah, me too. The other students around them went on long tangents, rambling on about their grades or their new clothes. But Michael and Jenna stayed quiet. What was there to say? They had no idea where Fritz was, discovered many inexplicable phenomenons the previous night. They not only stayed up extremely late searching, but also got no sleep, and none of those were appropriate or comfortable discussions in the middle of a crowded schoolyard. After a long moment, Jenna broke the silence, speaking slowly, almost moaning. Michael, I found... She closed her eyes. Michael asked, Found what? Jenna started leaning toward Michael, who grabbed her shoulders in fear that she would crash onto the floor. She opened her bloodshot eyes and kept walking alongside Michael without uttering a word. Michael kept walking, deciding not to pry when she was obviously not in the right state of mind to have a serious discussion. Then, Michael froze dead in his tracks as he approached the top of the short, white staircase, his attention drawn to the papers rattling in the wind against the glass door entrance. Jenna stopped next to him, fixated, a tear in her eye. More missing posters. One was an 8-year-old girl named Cassidy. Another was a boy of 5 by the name of Alexander. The third was a 7-year-old named Michael. The fourth was Fritz. All of them disappeared the same day as Fritz, or not long after. Michael and Jenna just stared for a long while, as if hypnotized. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew what the other was thinking. They were definitely child abductions. What were the odds of 4 children all going missing at almost the same time? But they were last seen at different areas of Hurricane. Could one man be taking them from all across the town, or was it a coordinated effort with various people? Michael pondered the possibility of multiple criminals suddenly appearing after a 20-year streak of murder and kidnapping-free Hurricane, compared to the probability of all the children suddenly getting lost in public places, all in the same small time frame, at numerous places in town, by total coincidence. Michael blinked when he realized that he already knew it was evidently a child abduction, even before he learned of the other disappearances from the posters. Fritz was clearly found and taken by someone the previous night. Michael shivered, all the disturbing discoveries surging his sluggish mind. Then, he recalled how little sleep he got, and how vivid of a dream he had. His cognitive functioning was surely off. Then, even with his sleep-deprived mind, he realized that he had to make a choice. He could either go back to the grave they found the previous night and try to pick up Fritz's trail again, or go see if there was any helpful evidence near the addresses of the other missing children. But whoever this mysterious child abductor was, probably put the kids somewhere far from wherever he took them from. Would it be easier to find the location by looking at the more recent disappearances? Or was Fritz in a separate place from the other boy and girls? Or were any of these ideas even relevant? Chief Margin's office was enormous, considering Anthony only had a cramped cubicle to himself. The redwood desk was littered with files, stacked with paperwork and case information. Atop the desk, behind Margin, that was between 2 overflowing metallic file cabinets, was a red telephone and a black typewriter. Anthony slammed his arms on the desk, shouting, "What?" Margin stared directly into Anthony's green eyes, but let sympathy slip into his hard expression. "It is against regulation to allow someone to investigate a case pertaining to a relative." "What about yesterday?" Margin replied sternly. "That was before we discovered another child went missing the same night, and another early the following morning." He leaned forward. "And another this morning." He crossed his arms on the desk, his brown eyes still perfectly locked on Anthony's. "Before it appeared to be a child abduction." Anthony leapt to his feet. "He's my son!" Marge's voice was calm, yet pure still. "I understand." Anthony slammed his fists against the desk again. "No, you don't!" He turned to the yellow door as it swung open. A young officer, with brown hair and a standard blue uniform, stepped into the room. He whipped his brown eyes from Margin to Anthony and back. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Margin leaned back and nodded to the policeman. "Yes." He turned his gaze back to Anthony. "You are excused, Anthony." Anthony turned back to Margin with a vile glare, refusing to move an inch. Margin stood tall and leaned over the table, so close that he was almost touching Anthony's face. "You are excused, Anthony." Although maintaining an imposing stance, he appeared more impatient than angry. Anthony froze as if his feet were glued to the floor, every muscle in his body immobile. Margin opened his mouth to repeat himself when Anthony stomped out of the room, the short officer keeping a concerned gaze on him as he carefully shut the door. Michael sat in his creaky chair, feeling his eyes burn. He shut them, letting his body relax for just one moment, his head tilting downward. Then he flinched as he practically pried his eyes open, forcing his head back up toward the teacher with extreme, almost painful effort. He felt the water in his eyes and watched as the world warped around him. He pinched himself, regaining another few seconds of focus. Mr. Bryan put the lid back onto the blue marker with a pop. And that'll be all for today. Make sure to review the content in your book, page 113. Michael blinked, realizing he had no recollection of the entire class session. He had trouble understanding science, sometimes needed a little help in English, but he knew that he was seriously exhausted if he couldn't focus on math. Michael turned to Jenna, whose head was slowly tilting from side to side, as if she might collapse at any minute. She met his gaze, then they gathered their books and walked unsteadily to the cafeteria. The second that Jenna sat down at the long, metallic table, she asked, "Same time?" Michael slowly set his backpack on the floor, feeling like the air around him was made of water, and he had to put physical effort into every little movement. "Yeah, same time." Michael realized that he responded without understanding the question. He pondered for a minute, gazing at the table as it registered in his mind that Jenna was asking when they would go searching for Fritz again. Then, he decided that he gave the correct answer. Jenna placed her lunchbox on the table and opened it with trembling hands. "I found something last night." Michael turned his head to Jenna. "What was it?" Jenna took a cup of yogurt from her lunchbox, peeled off the plastic top, and set them beside her napkin. She closed her eyes for a long moment, then opened them again. Michael realized that it was the second time Jenna tried to tell him what she found. Whatever it was must have been important, but she was just too tired to retain her train of thought. Michael shut his eyes, hoping to ease their burning. When he opened them, he said, "We should probably just get some sleep when we get home." And Jenna stared at Michael with her crimson eyes, speaking like she was drunk. "I'm not tired." Michael knew it was a lie. He shrugged and returned his attention to taking his lunchbox from his backpack. After he set his lunchbox in front of him, he startled at a loud thump and the sudden vibration of the entire table. He turned to see Jenna with her eyes closed, her head laying against the table, and her arm limp next to her yogurt that had been bombarded by her red hair. Michael slid the yogurt away from Jenna, then used his napkin to wipe the oozing pink substance from her shimmery hair. He smoothed her hair back, straightening it, then stared at her. He was tempted to fall asleep next to her, to relax his muscles, to moisten his dry eyes, to get just a few minutes of rest. He realized to also have a vivid dream. He decided to take food over rest. The tall buildings and rustling tree branches flew past at an incredible speed, appearing as one long, multicolored streak. The only sounds were of the relentless car tires against the dingy asphalt and Anthony's own tormented mind. He was beyond infuriated to have been reassigned to the broken windows case. How unimportant, how irrelevant, completely insignificant to the kidnapping of a child. His child. His son who loved rock songs and giant stuffed animals. His son who dreamed of being an astronaut and an artist. His innocent, loving baby boy. Anthony couldn't just do nothing. He had to do something. But what was he supposed to do? If he broke protocol, he would lose his job. With no access to the crime lab's resources, he wouldn't be any help to Fritz at all. He had to find some sort of balance, where he could break protocol just enough to thoroughly investigate his son's disappearance, but abide enough to avoid any unwanted attention. He wasn't sure how he was going to pull it off. Anthony pulled up in his driveway and stepped out of his blue car. He approached the front door of the house, unlocked it, placed his hand on the knob, then froze. How could he tell Alice that he couldn't look for Fritz? How could he tell her that the case was now in the hands of others, mostly strangers? She was already struggling to grasp the last remaining drops of hope and confidence she had, in the middle of a vast, dry tank devoid of happiness that was once filled with bliss and wonder. How could he drain what little there was left and devastate her down to the shattered core? The knob turned of its own volition, and the door swung open. Alice stood before Anthony, her eyes wide, panic on her face, tears in her eyes. She blurted, "Did you find anything?" Her voice was shaky, dreading a tragic answer that would leave her heart fractured. Anthony opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I'll tell you inside." Since he knew in his gut that no one was hiding, Jack just scanned the area with his flashlight. The giant dining area was strewn with tables and chairs, neon-colored cloths draped over them and dangling to the tiled floor. He paused for a moment as his light came over the animatronics, who were frozen in place mid-song as they were switched off. Jack twirled his heavy flashlight, watching the myriad of glitter pulsate like flickering stars scattered across the room, his footsteps echoing eerily off the walls as he approached the stage. He shined his light onto each of the 3 robotic animals, wondering whether the mechanics discovered the cause of the malfunction earlier that day. He remembered that both his managers, Henry and William, had, understandingly, told him not to touch them. Then, his mind was suddenly surged with memories of when he arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes before closing. Jack tried to change his train of thought, attempting to focus on how his friend Jefferson called him earlier, planning a time to hang out. It didn't work for very long, and his cerebration was abruptly consumed by a flashback of pulling up to the restaurant with a police car parked just in front of the building. Jack recalled the alarm on everyone's face, the hesitation in their movements, the overall presence of discomfort upon learning what had happened during the malfunction. That a boy had suddenly disappeared, last seen with a suspicious-looking employee. 2 policemen had interrogated Henry and William for nearly 30 minutes, then, by the time Jack walked in through the glass doors, moved on to question the rest of the staff. One of the officers had asked, "Where were you last night? And early this morning?" Jack had shaken his head. "I was at home." "What were you doing?" "Just watching TV. It was some crime show. Forgot the name, haven't seen it before. Then this morning, I was still just watching TV, except it was a science fiction thing." The policeman scribbled in his notebook. "Did you see anything unusual during your time here? Any suspicious activity?" Jack shook his head. "No, and I don't know any of the staff. Not really. I mean, it's only my 2nd day here." After the officer walked away, probably unsatisfied with so much unhelpful information, Jack noticed William motioning to him from his office. He walked over, and William gave Jack a concerned look as he closed the door. "Keep an extra good eye on the place, will ya?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, I will." William nodded. "And just be careful if..." He stopped. Jack knew what William was thinking, because he was thinking it too. Be careful in case a kidnapper actually hangs around here. Jack nodded again. I will. Jack startled back to reality with a loud screech. He whirled in the direction of Pirate's Cove, where the sound appeared to have reverberated from. For a short minute, he stood motionless, gazing at the gaping mouth of the hallway, childishly imagining eyes peering at him from the darkness. He called, "Hello?" There was no reply. Jack shone his flashlight up and down the hallway, finding nothing out of the ordinary. The sound came again, and Jack's hair stood on end. He called again, "Hello?" He hesitantly started toward Pirate's Cove. "Is someone there?" His internal monologue went on. "Something just fell over. Or it's just some dumb kid, if anything at all." He slowed his pace as the shriek of metal on metal resounded a third time. "The kidnapper's probably not tough. If he was, he'd be targeting adults." He knew that wasn't necessarily true. Then, Jack had the sudden recollection that he was only 20, and still somewhat of a kid himself. Then he thought, "Little kids, not me. I handled child abusers when I was a baby. I can certainly handle one as an adult. But it's not the kidnapper. He wouldn't just hang around here where all the police just were." Jack rounded the corner to Pirate's Cove and stopped, glancing around, glitter sparkling in his flashlight. He still didn't see anyone. Of course he wouldn't see anyone. If they heard him calling, then they were hiding. "No one's here." Jack heard a clicking sound, then jerked his flashlight toward the stage, the stars on the curtain shimmering and irritating his eyes that were adjusted to the darkness. Then he saw movement. It wasn't much, but it looked as if someone had moved their arm downward across the purple curtain from the inside. Jack froze, his heart racing. All he had to do was yell at the trespasser and tell him to leave, then report it in the morning. But what if they didn't leave when he asked? Then he would have to force them out. "It's not a person." Jack found that mental statement hard to believe, and cautiously approached the stage. "Hey! You're not allowed in here!" He lifted himself atop the stage, grabbed the curtain, then froze again. "Who are you?" He threw back the curtain to see deep red eyes piercing his soul, wide jaw gaping over his head, long serrated teeth, sharp metallic claws. Jack flinched. As rationality flooded his confused mind, he realized that it was just the broken animatronic. It was only Foxy. It stood still, lifeless in a weird pose with its head tilted upward, the arm with the rusty hook crossing the apparatus chest and almost touching the left arm that was held straight out. A shredded eye patch clung to one eye, and a dull, green robotic parrot sat on the shoulder of the massive machine. Judging by the exposed metal and entangled wires seeping from vast fissures in the red, furry flesh, Jack guessed that the problems with the animatronic were difficult to find and solve. It took Jack a long moment to remember why he swung open the curtain in the first place, then realized that no one was on stage, except for Foxy. Jack turned around in a full circle, scanning his ominous surroundings. Did whoever this mysterious person was slip out of the curtain without him noticing? No, I don't think so. It must have been nothing. When Jack returned his gaze to the towering mechanism, he noticed an obscure, white shape in the corner of his eye. He looked down to see a thin, deep engraving in the flesh of the animatronic's left arm. An almost perfect W. End of chapter 5.